different ways, like the Irish. They would. Hey, you want to get this one out of the way? Yeah. Or you want? What you gonna do? Yeah, it's right there. It's good.
Hi, everyone. Hi, hi. I'm not usually back here. My name's Abby Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research. And on behalf of Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., our director, and myself and the center as a whole, it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight to participate in a very important conversation that needs to be happening. And I think it will be happening. The more we talk about it, the more we'll be learning about this, about the convict lease system. And I won't say more about it because there are others in this room who can speak much better than I can about it. I want to thank our partners in bringing this together. The African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I'll say we've actually done, the Hutchins Center has done some work with that group. And when I saw them here, I was delighted to see them because it was one of the more rewarding experiences that I've had recently. The Harvard University Graduate School of Design, specifically the Critical Conservation Program, the Black Student Union at the Kennedy School, the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice, and of course the Convict Leasing and Labor Project. I'm just going to say a few words about Hannah Kim, who brought this event together. Hannah Kim is a graduate student at in the Harvard Graduate School of Design. She's pursuing a Master in Design Studies with a concentration in art, design, and the public domain. And I'll say I met Hannah about a month ago, I guess, and if you ever want to get something done, I suggest enlisting Hannah Kim to be on your side. Her persistence is incredible. When she first brought this to our attention, I can't even remember if I got it first or if it was I can't remember how exactly it landed in my inbox, but I was delighted that it did, and I canvassed several of the faculty members we work with, and I said, we have to do this. This is just really important work. And they all said, yes, we have to do this. And then I let it sit in my inbox for a little while longer, as anyone who knows me knows is bound to happen. But Hannah came to my office one day and said, she came to my office, but I'm so glad that her persistence, I know I'm probably not representing her well, but all of this is to say, she believes in this so much, and she's dedicating herself and her energies and talents to this project and to getting the word out about this project. And so I want to give it up for Hannah Kim. And Hannah will come up to introduce the founders of the Convict Leasing and Labor Project, Reginald Moore Sr. and Samuel L. Collins III. So without further ado, I give you Hannah Kim. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Unearthing the Truth of Slavery by Another Name. I would like to first thank the Hutchins Center of African and African American Research for their generous support. I also would like to acknowledge Susan Snyder and George Thomas, my professors from the Critical Conservation Program at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Thank you for giving me the tools to build the bridge that connected me to Mr. Moore and Mr. Collins. As Abby introduced, my name is Hannah Kim, and I'm a candidate of Master in Design Studies at the Harvard Graduate School of Design with a concentration in the art, design, and the public domain program. As an artist and designer, I'm interested in creating more justice through visual communication and storytelling. Before I introduce tonight's speakers to everyone, I would like to do a very quick and simple group exercise with everyone, one of you. I actually want everyone to go around and count off by number. So starting from the corner, maybe up there, shout your number so that everyone can hear you. And as we all count, I want you to sort of pay attention to who's saying it. So look at their faces and maybe listen to their voice a little bit more carefully. So could you start us off counting 1, 2, 3, 4?
1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
11, 12, 13,
15,
17, 18, 19,
20,
21,
22, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30,
31,
32, 33,
34, 35,
36,
37,
Yes.
39.
40.
41, 42.
45.
So there are around 45 people in this room, and maybe more will come. I hope so. With that in mind, imagine that somewhere in this country, 95 people, so that's doubled the people that are sitting in this room. 95 people who are buried together have been excavated by an accident. But can something of this scope really be an accident? See the burial site of nearly 100 slaves. As I read the headline, I felt the chills going down my spine. I thought, this can't be true. But as I read the news every day, the initial shock wore off. Months passed by. But last December, I remembered this article and decided to write a research paper about it. So I started digging deeper into what happened in Sugar Land, Texas, a place I've never been. But it was not difficult to find that this sweet city had a bitter past. How could 95 people have been buried in an unmarked burial site? Who were these people? What were their lives like? Countless articles, archived maps, historical documents all pointed towards something that I feared to be true. Tonight's story is as unimaginable and yet as real as it gets. This is the part of American history that is so prevalent, yet so mystified, one that continues to be sanitized and silenced in our public dialogue, one that is hidden in our plain sight. My hope for tonight's talk is that we can begin to unearth the truth that might be right underneath where we are standing. I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Reginald Moore, who is a historian with a certification in community economic development from the College of Biblical Studies. He is also a community activist and has a particular interest in prison reform and prisoner reentry. Mr. Moore has worked for decades to gain recognition for the past abuses associated with Texas convict leasing system. He served as a correctional officer in the Texas Department of Corrections from 1985 to 1988. He founded the Convict Leasing and Labor Project in 2018. His research materials are archived at the Woodson Research Center at Rice University. Mr. Sam Collins III has been providing financial services in the Galveston County community for over 19 years. He has a BBA in accounting from Texas A&M University in College Station. In April 2012, he opened SLC Investment Services. Mr. Collins serves on several boards, including National Trust for Historic Preservation, Rosenberg Library Trustee, and the Ruby Bridges Foundation. In 2015, Mr. Collins was awarded the Galveston County Citizen of the Year by the Galveston County Daily newspaper. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Collins to the stage.
Wow. Hannah is really just awesome for more reasons than one. When I first read her paper, I shared it with several individuals and mentioned that it should be required reading, not only for the elected officials in Sugar Land, Fort Bend County, and our community, but for everyone. So if you have not read it, you can actually go to the National Trust site and see a brief portion of it. It was reduced, but she has an entire paper on unearthing this truth. Earlier today, I spoke with the graduate students in the graduate design class, and I talked to them about each of us are instruments, just like this pen I have in my pocket. If I write a story, what sense does it make for the pen to take credit? So in this journey with Mr. Moore and others, we're all instruments used by our Creator. And it's not for us to take credit for anything that's happening, but the Creator is unveiling and unearthing this truth at this time. So I want to thank Harvard for giving us this opportunity to share time and space with you to talk about this very difficult subject, but a conversation we need to have. Unearthing the truth in Sugar Land. What do you see in this picture? This is a picture of convicts unloading a cane car at the Imperial Sugar Company around 1900. You're looking at what convict leasing was. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. So after the Civil War, instead of us moving forward with courage, there was an environment that was recreated to relive what we had just had a very difficult war about. But to truly understand, we have to go back and look at the cracks in the foundation that caused us to get to this point in 2019. What's history? It's like a salad, I often say. The lettuce and tomato are the stories you hear all the time about the founding fathers. In Texas, we talk about the father of Texas being Stephen F. Austin. These are the plantations that you visit, and the docents give you a tour and tell you the story of the plantation owners and those that settled the city and the establishments like Harvard from 1636. We tell the story of these individuals that settled this area. But the salad is made up of so much more than lettuce and tomato. Sometimes you have onions, bell peppers, croutons, hot peppers, and that gives our history more flavor. So when the backhoe dug into the ground there in Sugar Land, it was like slicing into an onion for some of us. That onion makes some of us cry. There are others that just don't want any onion in the salad, but there's onion in the salad. And that backhoe revealed that. How did we get here? I talked about the cracks in the foundation in Texas, the father of Texas, Stephen F. Austin. In 1824, in August of 1824, there was a new law for settling Texas. Mexico was allowing settlers to come in, and Stephen F. Austin was charged with getting 300 families to come to Texas. I think he actually got 297 to settle Texas. The Texians is what they were called. He granted land to immigrants based on 640 acres to the husband, 320 to the wife, 160 for every child, and then there was an incentive, 80 extra acres for every slave that you bought. Now, to understand this, you have to realize Mexico had outlawed slavery and had told them that you have to free your slaves within 5 years, and any of the children being born should be free. But the Texans didn't want to adhere to those rules. So last weekend, March 2nd, my timeline in social media was filled with a reminder of March 2nd, 1836, is when Texas declared their independence. The Battle of the Alamo was happening, and we are taught in Texas, remember the Alamo. Of course, the Battle of San Jacinto came after the Alamo, and Sam Houston defeated Santa Anna. And for so many years, I thought Santa Anna was the bad guy. But Santa Anna was coming to get rid of the Texians so that the enslaved people could be free. But unfortunately, he was defeated at San Jacinto, and slavery lasted another 29 years. So in 1843, Samuel May Williams, his brothers, established a sugar mill there in Sugar Land. And that sugar mill, that company still exists today, 176 years later, as Imperial Sugar Company. It wasn't called Imperial originally. It was later given the Imperial Sugar name, but it traces its history back to 1843, before Texas was even a state. See, between 1836 and 1845, Texas was its own nation. And if you've seen any of the news and commercials, there's still talk of seceding again in Texas. But Texas has this independent spirit, and I've always embraced that spirit, but I didn't know the full history or truth of what happened in our state. So then in 1861, we have the Great War to 1865. Of course, Texas was one of the states that seceded with several other southern states, and slavery was lasted until 1865, because with Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, the state of Texas and Confederacy didn't recognize his authority. Therefore, they would not free their slaves. All states in rebellion, Lincoln said, had to free their slaves, and realized that Lincoln did not free the slaves in the northern states. The Emancipation Proclamation only allowed the slaves in states that were in rebellion. So it wasn't until 1865, after the end of the Civil War, and in Galveston, Texas, where I was born. I'm a BOI, born on the island. All of y'all are BOIs too, born off the island. All right? So we're all BOIs. So in Galveston, Texas, on June 19th, 1865, Gordon Granger makes the announcement that the enslaved people of Texas are free. Now, it wasn't until the 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery in December of 1865. But the thing about Juneteenth is it's a day that the enslaved individuals chose to celebrate for themselves. So in 1980, it became a holiday in the state of Texas, and now it's recognized in over 47 states all over the country as the one day that the enslaved people get to celebrate their freedom. Of course, freedom came to different territories at different times, but Galveston was the last major port west of New Orleans to get the news. And they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have Instagram, so news traveled slower. But at the time, it wasn't that the enslaved individuals didn't know about the Emancipation Proclamation or that the war was going on. It's just that the people in Texas would not recognize that. But there's this hope of freedom with Juneteenth. On June 18th, you go to sleep as an enslaved individual. On June 19th, you get this news that now you are free after hundreds of years and decades of praying by your ancestors before you that the message of freedom has finally come. So what do you do with that message of freedom? The 13th Amendment had a clause, though. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So here, who gets to make the laws? This clause was a big clause in this. So between 1867 and 1877, advancement of African Americans during this Reconstruction period, individuals registered to vote. I've traced two of my fourth great-grandfathers to August of 1867. They registered to vote, one on August the 3rd and another on August the 28th. Benjamin Bonner, that registered to vote in 1867, had actually came to Brazoria in 1852 as a 10-year-old child. So by 1867, he's 25 years old. He registered to vote with the hope of this freedom that is coming to the state of Texas. So individuals received positions, elected positions. They were trying to make the best of their lives, but racism is still present. Here's a cartoon from 1876. In self-defense, if I had killed you, you would have grown up to rule me. See, this is what they were afraid of, that individuals would then have rule over them. So I don't know if you are familiar with the ghost pepper challenge, but this racism that we have is sort of like that ghost pepper. It's been added to the salad. The slavery and the inhumanity has been added to our system. And if you see any of these videos of these ghost peppers or habanero peppers, if you eat too many of them, you might like spice in the beginning. But this racism that's in our system is sort of like that. I can't deal with spicy foods. They taste good going in, but not so well coming out. So America, with this truth, is starting to sweat as this is unearthed. The leg is starting to tremble, and our system needs to be flushed of this ghost pepper of racism. So in 1878, after that 1876 cartoon, you have Cunningham and Ellis who take over the state's prison population and start leasing out these individuals. In 1880, we found a contract in Galveston. And you'll see here the names Ball, Hutching, and Company. In Galveston, the high school is called Ball High School, after George Ball. Hutching and Seeley are other families that are recognized in Galveston as very prominent philanthropic individuals. Our nation, our cities, our counties are littered with the iconography of these individuals that are the lettuce and tomato of this history salad. So this contract is online at the Galveston and Texas History Center. But what you'll notice in it, typed into the contract, the number 2 stipulation, The convicts whose labor is to be furnished under this contract shall be Negroes. So it wasn't just about convict labor. It was about specific convicts. And as public projects were needed to be completed, as manual labor was needed on the plantations and farms, they arrested more people. 1878 to 1912, this convict leasing in Texas exploded. In Austin, we have our Capitol. The Capitol was built by the convict labor. Here they're working in a rock quarry if you see this one individual, I'd like to point this out. You see him waving? He got his hand up. The humanity of the individual still wanted to be recognized. In the back, you still see the men with their hands up. They recognize their pictures being taken. So even in this environment, they're still human beings. And too often we try to, and here's another individual with his hand up. I don't know, maybe he got a fist up and protesting. So let me out of here. But here, even in this environment, these men are still showing their human. All of them turn toward the camera to take a picture, right? Sometimes we take the humanity out of it. In 1915, Hannah has this in her paper. You see a map of the territory where the bodies were found, and it was a convict camp, and then we have the picture in 2018. So here, the Brazos River that's flowing through there, you see the river. If you overlay these, and it may not be exact, but they didn't have Google Earth in 1915. But what you get is an idea of where the railroad tracks are running. All right, railroad tracks up here. And this area is that camp. Here's a closer shot of the area. And that intersection is Highway 6 and Highway 90 in Sugar Land. And that's an even closer. So the school that Fort Bend ISD is being built in this area. That's an HEB and other development all around this area. So when you think about these camps, if people live, they had to die. Where did they bury them? Sugar Land was incorporated as a city in 1959. We're often reminded of that by the city manager. And in 2018, I talked about the backhoe revealing these bodies on the school site there. Fort Bend ISD was building a new high school. And of course, we support education, but there was somewhere else they could have built this. But they chose this site, and as an instrument, the Creator used them to help unearth this truth. So in the graves, there were chains and shackles and hose, and some of them were there in the graves with the individuals, and some were just around the site that had been covered up. These are drawings of the remains. So Hannah mentioned how she had read the story. Here are other headlines of how a chilling discovery in Texas led to a battle over one of the worst chapters in U.S. history. Grave discovery unearths a legacy of black convict labor, USA Today. Mr. Moore here at Fort Bend ISD finds historic cemetery near construction site. Mr. Moore at the old Imperial Prison Farm. The Houston Chronicle wrote a story, Brooke Lewis, and Bill Mills wrote a book about 25 years behind prison bars. Human lives were not of value. Nobody was relieved until he dropped in his tracks. Now, this is by a white convict. Guards often said the men did not cost them any money, and the mules did. That's why there was more sympathy for the mules than for the men. This kind of whipping was not whipping with a bat. This kind of whipping was not whipping with a bat. He would sit on his horse and whip the men like oxen, any place he could hit. It's in his book, 25 Years Behind Prison Bars. Convicts labored bare-legged in wet sugarcane fields, dying like flies in the periodic epidemics of fevers. This book, Sugar Land, Texas, and the Imperial Sugar Company, is a book Mr. Moore shared with me that is also in the collection at the Galveston, Texas History Center at the Rosenberg Library there in Galveston. In the end, what this really was a replacement for the system of slavery that had existed before the Civil War. There's no place in America that proves that more powerfully than Sugar Land, Douglas Blackmun said. He's the author of Slavery by Another Name, the book, and there's also a documentary. The stories that the remains of those men tell should terrify all of us. The injuries to those men and the things that the archaeologists, somebody in the hall, yeah, y'all help me out. All right, that's a tongue twister for me today. Are going to be able to explain about their hunger, their musculature, and the abuses and the scars and the damages to their bones. All of those things, they tell a story, whether we know their names or not. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, following the Civil War, Southern states enacted black codes to subjugate newly freed slaves and maintain the pre-war racial hierarchy. Among these laws, provisions were draconian fines for violating broad prescriptions and vagrancy and other dubious offenses. When newly freed slaves were unable to pay imposed fines, states often demanded involuntary labor instead. This was just a recent comment by her in March of 2009. The evolution of convict leasing in America then and now. As Mr. Moore does this work, it's not just about the past, the 1900s. He works to tell the story of men even today and the mass incarceration and the re-entry of those individuals into our society. Here in 1903, you see juvenile convicts at an unknown location. Sometimes children as young as 8, 9, 10 years old were picked up as orphans. So they may have been fishing in a lake or stream, and someone came along and just picked them up and called them an orphan, shipped them off to a plantation to work, and their parents never knew where they went. The youngest individual in the Sugar Land 95 was 14 years old, the oldest 70. 1907, a photo from Birmingham, Alabama. 1909, crews repair railroads in Sugar Land. 1911, Mississippi, clearing land. 125 black prisoners leased to coal company killed in an explosion in Birmingham in 1911. State prison in Angola, Louisiana. In the 95, there was one female, 94 men and one female. Here from 1930, women prisoners wait in line at Parchment Post Office in Mississippi. And this is that powerful image that Hannah used on the poster. And her Photoshop skills are incredible. We talked about that. She took the bar out for the poster, but when you think about this, I think this young man was 13 or 14 years old. The punishment for this individual, whatever offense could he have done as a child, not picked enough cotton, not done the work that they wanted him to do to end up in this position. 1977, 2004, today. So companies are still using these inmates for farming, making different products. In California, in July of 2018, they used inmates to fight fires in California. Now, they can fight the fires in Orange, but when they're released, they can't get hired by the fire department. Think about that for a moment. They can put their life on the line for free, but we will not hire them because of their records once they get out to get a job with benefits. Solar panels. So sometimes when we are doing things to become more energy efficient, we don't even know we're supporting these companies. There are prisons and companies all across the country who use free or barely paid prison labor to make a profit, according to the Prison Policy Initiative in 2017. These prisoners make between 12 cents and $1.14 an hour. Companies like McDonald's, Unicor, Microsoft, Honda, Victoria's Secrets. The list doesn't include the states like Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas that don't pay prisoners at all for labor. Places like Angola State Prison are known for the cruel and inhumane treatment of their prisoners, forcing them to live in tents and work for free. The Root 2017. So when we think about the crown and the star in this symbolism and iconography, in Sugar Land, often the city manager reminds us that, oh, Sugar Land today had nothing to do with that history. Sugar Land wasn't incorporated until 1959. Remember, I told you the Imperial Sugar Company started in 1843. I think I had, if I didn't leave it, a package of Imperial Sugar in my pocket. But it started in 1853 and is proudly displayed on the package. But the city of Sugar Land, right in the center of that city seal, they embrace that crown. Sugar Land Heritage Foundation embraces the crown. The independent spirit of Texas and the star is embraced in the crown. Embraced in the city seal, I mean. So I told the elected officials in Sugar Land, if you wear the crown, you have to wear the clothes that go with the crown. Now, the clothes they want you to see is the suit, is the economic development. The shiny shoes is the town square. But what they don't want you to see is the dirty undergarments. And what appears to be our agitation at times is just to clean the dirty undergarments. Because if your suit is clean and your shoes are shined and your jewelry is looking good, but your undergarments are dirty, you still stink. So it's our job to help clean it up. Here's a quote by the city manager. There's not a single facility, road, nor improvement that exists today in the city of Sugar Land that can be traced back to either the convict lease program or slavery. Huh? Not a single? Not a single? January 2017. It's important for the city council. Here, this is the mayor of Sugar Land. So we had a October 23rd, and you can look it up online. At the meeting, Mr. Moore and I spoke, trying to convince them not to move forward. And at the beginning of the meeting, he informs us that it's important for this city council that we have, that people get to speak. But it's also important that we have order. If we have to, we will clear the room with a very authoritarian tone. It was maybe 20, 25 people there. What you gonna clear the room for? Was it really necessary to give us that stern warning at that city council meeting? Fort Bend ISD, as I said, is building a new school. So through this process, you have subject matter experts like Mr. Moore that have been doing the work. Maybe they haven't been given the titles of institutions or acknowledgement by institutions to be a doctor, but Mr. Moore is our Dr. Moore. And the thing is, sometimes when you're engaging these individuals, they undervalue your contributions. So as I said, I've been on the National Trust Board for 12 years. I've been doing preservation work in my community long before I met Mr. Moore, and Mr. Moore's been doing it longer than I have in the Sugar Land area. But I received an email from the superintendent. And he says, it is regrettable that you continue to characterize our actions in such a negative light. We didn't require your recommendation to understand these things, but I can appreciate the fact that you have the privilege of viewing all of this through a completely different lens, since you are not accountable to the taxpayers of Fort Bend ISD. Well, Dr. Dupree, I'm not going to tell y'all what I reply. But let's just say he didn't send me any more emails about that subject. The point is, sometime when you're working in communities, and even back in the 1880s, 90s, 70s, 1600s, certain individuals are not valued. When the Constitution was written, individuals were counted as 3/5. When we talk about my fourth great-grandfather registering to vote, well, my fourth great-grandmother couldn't register to vote. So at different time periods, individuals are not valued in society, and they didn't see the work of the community advocates as important as the counsel they were getting from their legal teams and other individuals. So we've been in this fight and this battle. But those who commit the murders write the reports. Ida B. Wells. Mr. Moore is writing his own report. As I said, he's the subject matter expert that has taken on the task of speaking for these bones, speaking for these men and one woman to let the world know that this crime against humanity cannot be silenced anymore. There's Mr. Moore, Rain Clark, there's Mr. Dupree. They wouldn't let me get in the picture. No, I wasn't there that day. So here we had a candlelight vigil. These are other activities. We had a program, task force meeting. That's when this Justice for the Sugar Land 95. And there are several groups working. But what I like to explain to individuals is that Mr. Moore, for the past 35 years, has been the drumbeat of constant noise and agitation to let them know that they shouldn't be building in all these areas and they're building on top of graves. So this is a picture from Texas Monthly. Uh-oh, we want to go back and stay here. So at this time, with no further ado, the man of the hour and our very own doctor. Let's give a round of applause for Mr. Reginald Moore.
I'd like to thank Harvard for this distinguished opportunity, this distinguished university. I believe that they may call themselves the most distinguished, but I guess, many may feel the same way. But I want to start out with one thing here. I'm ready for you guys to repeat after me. Freedom ain't free.
Freedom ain't free.
Pharaoh,
Let
my people go.
Let my people go.
Back, if we could use, we're coming up on the 400th anniversary of when slavery was begun here. I guess that was 1519. Now we're talking, I believe that was, 1619. So now we're coming up, we're on the 400th anniversary, and I use an analogy of how the children of Israel were in bondage and captivity for 400 years, of bondage, of slavery. Now we got 400 years of captivity that we are in slavery here. Slavery did not end 1619. Slavery is still going on today, as we're well aware, in a new form of penal system that we call the prison industrial complex. When I started working out as a correctional officer in 1985, we had 33 prisons. Now we have over 110. We have more blacks incarcerated per capita, per number, than it was blacks in the slave system per capita by numbers. During the period of time when Pharaoh said, "Let my people go," I'm crying out to the land, to the people, to the locals, the state, to the United States for sanctioning the 13th Amendment, which was legislated in December 1865, as Mr. Collins stated. Well, when Pharaoh wouldn't let the people go, Moses said, if you don't let them go, you will let them go. It was some things that compelled the Pharaoh to let the people go. Then after he decided he's going to let them go, they ended up getting some type of restitution. They gave them all the bars of silver and gold and things to take with them. So we've been asking for some sort of restitution. Some people call it reparations. Some people call it an exoneration. But we have, as black Americans, haven't gotten any type of restitution, apology, or even acknowledgement for the fact that this atrocity happened. We've had other indigenous people, rightfully so. We had the Indians. We've apologized for the Holocaust, terrible incident. Some of our people call this a Texas Holocaust. Okay, so we're looking at when the children of Israel crossed over to the Promised Land. We had an event on, I believe that was the last event. That was for Martin Luther, what was that?
Martin Luther King Day?
Martin Luther King Day. And we considered that day of freedom. Where do we go from here? And we called ourselves, after we gathered together and had a nice event, got some proclamation from the state and the county. And I'd like to tip my hat off today to the county, who I believe was trying to do the right thing. We had a change over there, and it went from one political state to another one now that's taken over there. And these individuals are trying to move forward, have the commissioner there, KP George. We have Mr. Brian Middleton, who are African Americans. And we also have a good state representative there that's working diligently for us, Mr. Ron Reynolds, and a few others. And we also have Congressman Al Green that's stepping up, and we met with them. We're trying to move forward as far as making sure that we get state resolutions passed and maybe some federal regulations that could help us to be able to bury the bodies adequately so they be put back in the place where they came from. Mr. Blackman, he had the privilege to meet him, the gentleman, Douglas Blackman, slavery by another name. He came down with my board, and I have to say that I have a fine committee of board members with me, Miss Naomi Carrier, Miss Barbara Jones, Mr. Jay Jenkins, Mr. Sam Collins is on our advisory there, but we also have Captain Paul Matthews and Mr. Stephen Brown and a gentleman named
Dr. Galvan.
Dr. Galvan. He's a PhD and he's Hispanic American. And they all work diligent with us to make sure that we try to get this out. Again, we are trying to get the legislators to give $95 million, just asking for it, for some type of restitution for these atrocities that happen, these crimes against humanity. Again, when Pharaoh let the people go, they left there with some type of wealth, some type of worth. Now you have, when you were considered free in 1865, then you got enslaved through the Article Amendment 13 that said you were free unless convicted of a crime. Then I'm gonna take you back, the dad, but I'm also gonna grab your son. I'm gonna grab your children. So a lot of us African Americans in America, a lot of us, we have PTSD. I have PTSD. My stepfather, I was the oldest in my family, ended up committing a minor error with some of the things when I was in prison. I used to see guys coming there for minor offenses and doing a lot of time as African Americans, and I would see some of their white counterparts that had to do a far greater crime and get less time. As you're well aware, back we had the sentencing, we had the crack cocaine disparity, okay, where there was unjust sentences for people who had little 3 pebbles of crack, and you had somebody had a large amount of cocaine, and they were getting less time. And then Mr. Clinton came in with the 3 strikes you out. So I seen the prisons fill up, and by my fact that I seen my stepfather go through that, and I'm the oldest in the family. We had, my mother was, I think I was around 11 years old, and my brother was around 7, and my sisters and them were around 3 and 1. We had to go live in subsidized housing, go on welfare. Could have easily got caught up in it. In the mid-'80s, I was working as a longshoreman, a retired longshoreman. I'm grateful for the longshoremen, the Maritime Association in Houston, allowing me to give me the opportunity to be where I'm here today as a retiree, because I started working there in 1978 and we came through a recession, so I had to go to work for the prison system for a while. But I just wanted to let you know that, freedom is not free. So when we were living in the projects, we were living on food stamps. Could easily got caught up. A lot of my friends back in the mid-'80s, when the recession hit, they brought the crack cocaine in, and they was getting cracked out. Jobs were gone, and I was fortunate enough and blessed enough not to participate in that, even coming through an unequal childhood, I would say. That I say that I was going to look, everybody's going to prison, so if I'm going to prison, I'm going gray as an officer, not as an inmate. So that was a startling thing to me, to go work from being a free man to actually going to work in the prison system, which, in my opinion, it felt like bondage as an officer. For 8 hours, you were locked down behind bars, and you seen this deprived situation of individuals. When I first went there, the first farm that I went to was the first farm that was built in this region. I believe that I can really say, other than administration, this was the first farm that was built in the whole state of Texas after convict leasing was over with in 1878. They built this, in 1878 to 1883, they did some little minor leases, but they wouldn't renew Cunningham and Ellis' contract because the state seen it was so lucrative that they wanted to take it over themselves. So in 1886, they built this first prison farm called the Justice Unit 9. But old plantations became prisons, and the old plantation owners became wardens. So you had the same system just up under the new name. I think Mr. Douglas Blackman calls it slavery by another name. I call it slavery by a new name. So when I got there with the work there, it sort of reminded me of looking at Going to Win. You had all the white officers. When I got there, when I went there in the academy, they told me they had no black captains or majors in the whole system working inside the buildings. In the whole system, they had to force them to let us into a place called Ruiz Estelle that allowed black officers to be hired in numbers. So I was part of the second or the third year where they forced them in there. So we had inmates who had more rights, white inmates who had more rights than some of the black officers. Again, it was a travesty to see that these guys were still. When you look at some of those pictures up there with Hannah's with the Aggies and stuff in their hands, what those holes were, those were actually Aggies that they were using, and those are syphils that you see right here. But when you see them with those things there, they call them holes. They call them Aggies, and they call those guys that were out there call them on the whole line because they were horn. So when I saw that, I said, "Gosh, I mean, this is the first prison, so it was antiquated. All the blacks out in the field. You had the white officers overseeing them. Some of the black officers, we didn't have a lot of privileges, and we didn't have a lot of leeway. We were subordinate to most of the other officers there in the rank because we didn't have any ranks of anybody in high ranks at these facilities. So it was an eye-opening experience. So after the recession was over, I went back to working at the Port of Houston as a longshoreman, and I ended up getting a few injuries and getting retired a little early. And I wanted to write a book about cause and effect then and now. I believe a lot of us, especially African Americans, have someone, if they want to know, or have someone in their family that may have been victimized, that have been doing time. It not only affects them, it affects us. You have to send money to them. You have to maybe take up the slack for their kids and so forth, and it affects the family. And again, we all have PTSD from what happened way back in the 1800s. We're not healed. We're not well because it had a trickle-down effect. When your parents got in, those kids that didn't have opportunities to be good parents. Then because they didn't get what they needed, they couldn't give it to their kids, and then they'd get their 40 acres and a mule, okay? Then for freedom, you got reinstitutionalized and freedom without that. So when I got a chance to see that, and it was such an eye-opening experience, and I wanted to tell the story of cause and effect, what caused this and the effect of this, and what happened then and what's happening now. It was an old house there called the Flanagan House. If anybody ever heard of a guy named Leadbelly? Heard of Leadbelly? Okay. Well, this was a house that I tried to get preserved. I'm also a preservationist. When I was working now, they had a building now called Old Flanagan House, and where the wardens were actually staying at that time in the 80s. And down the way a little further down, the prisons didn't integrate until 1968. They were segregated. You had black prisons and white prisons. So slavery kind of continued on, and actually slavery is still going on today. So slavery didn't end in 1865. Okay, slavery, we're celebrating 400 years. Well, I'm celebrating 400 years of slavery, not 400 years when slavery started. Okay, when I went there, and this old house that was there, we tried to get it preserved, and they ended up tearing it down. That was the house that Leadbelly sung a song to get his way out of prison. And he sung this song with the governor there at this house, which is about from here to the streets out front, where the 95 bodies have been found. One of the things that we got to try to get, we did get preserved was the black prison building and the old Char House. The building that you see there, the Char House with Imperial Sugar, I got that building preserved myself and a group. A young lady named Miss Melissa Thibodeau was working with me in 05, but I had started working this pretty much in 01. I was going to the state asking them for monies for some type of restitution when they was getting ready to sell this land. When I found out about this house, what I was going to use as my cover story, I went and did the history there. I went and touched it to the General Land Office and to the archives and touched Stephen F. Austin's paper. This is where they digitized things, and it was a mind-blowing experience. And so we were able to, I asked them, if you guys are selling this land, do archaeological studies on it, which they didn't do. They circumvented the preservation codes. That's why we found these bodies today, because they didn't do proper preservation codes. They didn't want to know what was out there, because they did, they would have had to stop construction. Now we have the state land bank. What does that stand? The education
The
bank.
education fund, permanent
State-
endowment.
State Education Fund endowment, which what they told me back in 03 is that they couldn't give any restitution because the money that goes from the sale of this land through the General Land Office for the state goes into the education fund. Now we're finding that they're funding all private projects with this money. We asked them for a museum memorial back then in 03, and we're still asking today for a museum memorial. They need to be memorialized. We need them to have a museum. And what we want to do is to be able to tell the whole story, not about convict leasing just here in Fort Bend County and the state, but also how convict leasing went all throughout the South. This black man came down and said we had something that he never had experienced before, unearthing of individuals who were in the convict lease system. And he gave him some type of closure to see that. So we have something nobody else has. Well, I've gotten calls from Great Britain, Australia, Canada, all around, interested in this atrocity because it also goes to the transatlantic slave trade. They did convict leasing in Cuba. They did convict leasing all throughout those sugar plantations in Haiti. You know, a lot of those. So you have a lot of that was going on, and that is, and it's just ironic that we're here, standing here in Boston, because slavery started here in the New England states, but it ended in Texas. So it's ironic. You know, I think Mr. Collins got a shirt over there called "From Hitchcock to Harvard." But if I put a shirt, I'm gonna say from Boston to Texas, to Massachusetts to Texas. Well, it started in Massachusetts, started here in Boston, in this area here, but it ended in Texas. Okay, leaving Crispus Attucks and those guys, they came over in the 1500s, they brought slaves. Okay, and the last section, the last people to end slavery was in Texas, because they were retreating, the Southerners were retreating all the way back to Texas, because that was the last place before you can cross the border. Do you think, you heard, a lot of people heard of the Underground Railroad, right? What do you think our Underground Railroad went through? From here with Miss Harriet Tubman to up north, after you guys say we don't want more slavery, we started, but we're going to end it, and that was great. The Emancipation Proclamation said, you know, we got some things going. But 1776, it didn't do us any good. I mean, you know, think that Mr. Douglas said, my people not free. That's the what's that, the Proclamation 1776, what is it called? Declaration of Independence. It didn't give us independence. And when you look at the flag, it says, with liberty, one nation indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I don't think that's quite there. You know, I love America, but I'm not proud of the things that she's done or that she's doing. I mean, Dr. King said America was the biggest purveyor of violence in the world. I think we go around and we need to have a day of apology. And part of the event that we did Martin Luther King Day was called a day of repentance. I believe in 2 Chronicles 7:16, it says, if those who are called by my name would turn from their wicked ways and humble themselves and repent, then God would hear from heaven and he'll heal the land. I think we need to have a day of repentance for what we've done here in America and to the people that we've done this to. Actually, in my opinion, we kind of took this land from the Indians. We kind of used the slaves to build it. We have a lot to do. We going on and starting wars and doing things like that. And we can be using that money for social justice reform. That's what Dr. King was talking about when he did it on April 4th, 1967, and a year later he was dead. He was talking about America, kind of calling her out a little bit. Do we have the courage to hold America accountable? Are we going to be guilty of doing wrong? And some of us are guilty. Some Dr. King says it's going to be people guilty of doing wrong. And it's going to be also people guilty of doing nothing.
Yes, sir.
Are we complacent? Are we freedom fighters? The Underground Railroad with Harriet Tubman didn't run up north. The Underground Railroad ran where? Does anybody have an idea? For us in Texas?
Mexico.
Mexico, great. The Underground Railroad ran in Mexico, as Mr. Collins was saying. Santa Ana was coming down here to free the blacks because when the blacks would go to, would leave the plantations during the convict lease system, they would go there and they would allow them to treat their slaves. So they were coming here to free us, and so we need to acknowledge some of that. And we're talking about the Alamo. Again, Ms. Collins said that. It wasn't, we said patriotic. It was very patriotic, but it wasn't patriotic. They were fighting to hold the sentence to slavery. We've been fighting to try to advocate to change the history books. I was at the State Board of Education last July, petitioning that things need to be changed in the history book. This is not in the history books at all, the convict leasing system. My work is archived at Rice University, and I had one of the strong professors there, Dr. Laura Willenthal, we had Caleb McDaniel. They're also having a symposium on April the 12th. I'd love for you guys to be there. We have a lot of professors coming there and all, but they've archived my work there. The lady who's the archivist, who has several different titles behind her name, she's not a doctor, I call her a doctor, but she, Miss Amanda Folke, she deals with books every day, all day, every day, and goes to speak. She had never heard of the convict lease. Okay, this is a hidden story. We want to hit it. We want to hide it. We want to suppress it. Sugar Land has a dirty little secret, and it ain't sweet. It ain't sweet at all. Okay. And we, the people of America, we don't want to talk about it. I wasn't there. I had in my family, but a lot of our families, some of the families, are inheritors of some of the riches that these people benefited from, some of these companies. Texas was in a destitute state after the Civil War. These convict lease guys, they brought the state out of a destitute situation where it was insolvent at the time because of the war. A lot of these big companies, Union Pacific, and some of the companies that we got a book that details all these companies' railroads, and they built a state capitol in the Fort Bend County Courthouse, and a lot of these other different companies that benefited from it, especially Imperial Sugar. Well, the city of Sugar Land said, well, we didn't come around in 1959, but you inherited. In 1959, you inherited. You are inheritors of it. So a lot of us said, well, a lot of people, but all Austin 300, they were given that land. And they tell the blacks that you need to get off your behind and go to work and earn something. But this was given to them. What they wasn't given to them, they took. Okay? And then they were given these major leases of land, and now the land bank is selling some of this in this prison land, and we asking for some type of restitution for these people who were treated inhumanely. And I got up and spoke once at the Sugar Land when we had a gentleman there, Mr. John Now, who's the board chair of the Texas Historical Commission, and also he works for Silver Distributors, and they end up putting a mark out there in the front, and I got the landmark, and they had to end up having to do that because they didn't want to recognize my work out there. They wanted me to shut up. They threatened me, ran me off, and they said they was going to call the police, and I was waiting on them to call the police. I couldn't wait but they never did come. But hopefully they would have came. But, you have people who are sort of proud of this heritage. You had the sons and the daughters of the Confederacy that's there. They're proud of this. They won't let this history go. We had a gentleman there who, when I just told, go back to Mr. John Now, he was at the city of Sugar Land. He was petitioning that they get a war memorial put up in a dog park. He was petitioning in front of Sugar Land behind me, and I was up there petitioning that we get a museum and a memorial out for Bond. He ended up getting a war memorial in a dog park, and I told him that y'all treat dogs better than y'all treat us. Anybody heard of the Humane Society? They didn't have one back then. They were wrongfully. This was crimes against humanity. I wish they would have had a Humane Society back there, or somebody would have stood up. You had a lot of people turn it back. You had a lot of people who were remorseful. Now the church, a lot of the churches, a lot of the institutions. Georgetown right now, is giving away free tuition because they said they were built off of because they got sovereign off of slavery. You have a lot of our institutions profited from here. I'm not saying Harvard, but if you look back, we have a lot of checkered past as history, and even with our friends at Rice, Mr. Marsh, a lot of them has checkered passes, okay? And some of them are remorseful, and what we want to do is we repent. We want to build bridges. We don't want to whoop people up. We just want to hold each other accountable. You had a lot of the churches. People go to church on Sunday and have a lynching party after church. Wow, what a Christian thing to do. Was that Christ-like? Christ said he was the Prince of Peace. He said, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill. So are we a Christian nation when we can send bombs and weapons and tear up countries in Libya? And then we asked our friend Mr. Obama for one type of reparation. He didn't even table it. We got to hold all of us accountable. And I'm hurtful and sad that Ghana, the country of Ghana, they had to repent for selling their people to the slave traders. They didn't come over there and take them. They would border them. Because sometimes Ghana, the African country, little nations would go and take over tribes, and they would take people in their custody. Then when they came over, they would border them. So we all have something to repent about, okay? Including I. We all have something to repent about. We all have our prejudices and biases. And we're hoping that America heal. America needs healing. She's in bad shape right now. I believe she's on life support. We're trying to resuscitate her, and we've called this here a great awakening. America needs to have a great awakening. She needs to be remorseful. And if those who are called by my name would turn from their wicked ways, then we would heal the land. But I think until then, if America never repents for what she's doing, to acknowledge the travesties that she having, especially dealing with the convict lease system, that was another, like I said, another form of slavery. And to today, it's even worse than what it was during the point of slavery, and it's even worse since the time that I worked there, from 33 to 100. And matter of fact, today, the slaves in the prison system now are bought and sold on the Dow Jones stock market on the Corrections Corporation of America. Some of us may even have stock in the Corrections Corporation of America. And they depend on how well their stock is, depend on how many bodies they have in there. When they build a prison somewhere in a county or state, they make an agreement. We'll come here and build this prison here. We're going to provide jobs, but y'all going to have to provide beds. Y'all going to have to provide the people to put them in there. We need bodies. So you have a lot of these counties that was back then, these sheriffs and these police institutions, these judges, they would come in and do unfair sentences back then, like Ms. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. We have the same thing now. You have fines, and people find exuberant fines and penalties, and you'll be put in there. If you can't pay your bail, you'll be locked down. You have to do time. That's what they did then. If you couldn't pay your bail, you had to go to the prison for them. We had a young lady named Miss Sandra Bland. I don't know if anybody have heard of her. Anybody heard of Miss Sandra Bland that happened in Texas? Okay. Well, she died because she couldn't pay a $500 bail to get out. She was an educated person, just got a job working at Prairie View. My son finished in Prairie View. Money went to Prairie View. But she just got a job at Prairie View and was looking forward to going to work. Stopped in Prairie View. It was an issue between her and the officer who wanted to control, wanted the man to say, if you don't put your cigarette out, I'm going to light you up. Not light your cigarette, but I'm going to light you up. She, said a comment about that was unfair. He progressively got out, and she was put in there. Maybe if she could have got on reconnaissance, this is a person without a record. Maybe she could have got on reconnaissance, then maybe she would have been free. We have people in Fort Bend in Houston, Harris County, where I'm in Harris County and Fort Bend. We got more people in Harris County jail in Texas than anywhere in the United States. We have people there who are going to stand in there for a year waiting to go to pretrial. And some of them cop pleas so they can get out. Because I've been waiting so long. I never did it, but I got my family, I got my job, trying to take care of my kids. I need to work. I'm losing my house. I need to get out of here. I can't afford a lawyer. I don't have enough money for bail, so I'm gonna sign this statement saying that I did it. Then he puts you on there for a long probation period, and you do a hiccup, you're subject to get back into the system. So today the system is still looking for numbers to fill up these beds. their study, the prisoners are study increasing. Somebody told me I can't even keep up with it. It's 108. Somebody tell me it's 110. I don't know, okay? But when I was there, it was 33, and we had a thing called pre-release. It was such a fantastic thing when I worked at the Justice Warren at that unit that I was working at, and first got there. They had a thing called pre-release, where the guys would go to work during the daytime. The inmates who were 6 months, less than a year to get out, they was trying to reacclimate them. They would stay there 6 months. I mean, when they was there 6 months, they would go out, work, come back. Then a lot of those jobs that they were working on during the day, when they got out, they went to those jobs. It was such effective. It was so positive, they cut it out. It was cutting down recidivism rate. We need numbers. That's positive. That's not going to work. We can't keep using it. They cut that out, okay? And now when guys get out, need work, they can make them check the box. And you have now where a lot of these companies prefer to exploit the undocumented, where they won't hire an American or a guy coming out because they have to pay him FICA. His FICA, they have to pay Social Security, workman's comp, and the benefits where if you don't use an undocumented, you don't have to do it. So they're exploiting them, okay? And at the same time, our guys can't get jobs, and they have to go back because a lot of them, if you can't get a job and work, I'm wanting to work, you tell me I can take some skills. I got a few skills in there and a few things I could do, like the firefighters. They use them to fight the fires. When they come out, they can't get that job as a firefighter. And they purposely undercut the firefighters in civilian life, so that those jobs will be plentiful, that they can use a company. Instead of hiring enough civilian people, we're not going to hire enough because we know that we can go into prison and get these guys here, and they toxic fumes get in them, the health get bad. They're working for $1 an hour, how many dollars a day, then they come out, can't get a job. So that's what's happening now with these guys here. You know, they come out and they say, I want to work, but then if you don't get a job, he has to survive. Guess what? I'm going back to my old hustle, okay? And so I just want you guys to understand that freedom ain't free. And that's what you got here, these guys here, that's with the agate, that's a whole line. It's called a whole line right there. And when I left TDC, I was working as a back gate officer. I would turn them in and turn them out right there. And that was some of the work that what I would see every day. They would go in like this in that white. They'd go out there and work, come back, and the guy on the horse was white, and most of the inmates there were black in the field. So just want you guys to know that we got a long way to go in a short time to do it, and hopefully we can have a great awakening. We can have repentance in some kind of way that I hope you guys can advocate for us through our Texas legislation and our federal government, that we're trying to get things going. And we have our group, which I used to be called before this, was called Texas Slave Descendants Society. Then we changed the name to the Convict Leasing and Labor Project. And we have some brochures that I want to give you guys that y'all can look at, along with the great work that Ms. Hannah Kim has put together. And thank Mr. Collins for what he was doing. And again, thank our board and the people who are advocating for us in Fort Bend County, who mean to do the right thing, and hopefully that can happen. Hopefully we can get the state to do the right thing. So that's what we're counting on, for you guys to do that, to keep advocating. And I thank y'all for your turnout. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to go to our website. Hopefully we can get a documentary done. We've been trying to talk to Mr. Louis Gates and a few others to try to help us out with that.
Ask questions.
I am. But we just want to make sure that, those things are understood. We're trying to do that, do a book. Y'all stay tuned. We're going to go to our question and answer session here. I think we have a few minutes left, so thank y'all for this. And let it come back another time, and I could probably talk all night with this, but very passionate, and I love y'all, and thank y'all. And remember, freedom ain't free, and keep hope alive.
Don't leave. We have mics for you. If you have questions, we want you to ask those questions. We got one over here. You got one over here to the left. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore and Mr. Collins, for your commitment and for the necessary and important work that you're doing in Texas. My name is Janice. I'm also from Texas. And my question is, with the pervasive ignorance in Texas, which is evident in the responses from the local public officials, I'm interested in two things. One, what was Governor Greg Abbott's response to this work, and what was the TA, the Texas Education Agency's response when you were advocating for this history to be incorporated into the curriculum, which is needed?
Wow, that's a good question. You know, can I give you the sanitized version or you want the raw version? Raw version? Okay, we'll give you the raw version. Well, I wrote letters years ago and even currently, and you can see that in my archive work. And I've even gotten some support letters from Rice University. Ms. Laura Wildenthal wrote one. We asked the Texas Historical Commission, we asked the prison system itself, and which is under the auspice of the state of Texas. And we did write the governor a letter, and they told us to go to our state representatives, and we went there. Mr. Whitmire, who was over the criminal justice system, they put it and passed the buck. They didn't want to deal with it. They didn't want to deal with it at all. Said it wasn't their duty to do this. I even tried to get the Texas Criminal Justice Board. At that time, they had a gentleman named, that was Mr. Oliver Bell, who's the board chairman at the time, asked him for an apology. So I've asked for apologies from every agency, and none of them wanted to do it. And the state of Texas would not do it. Mr. Abbott was there, but we did get them to sort of do a little recognition on a monument that was there from the legislators, but they didn't move on this. And I believe your second question was on the education there, right? And I went there, talked to the education board just July, and I thought I was doing undercover, but Mr. Sam over here saw me on TV. Okay, and I thought I was easing up there. I didn't want to tell anybody. I don't want to overload my committee, what I'm doing. And so I went up there and advocating for them about, they was talking about Texas as heroic the Alamo. And I was giving them that example. And when it came time for me to speak, maybe I was somewhere in the middle, close to the end of the speakers, they were giving other speakers 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and they would expound on questions. They would, ask a question to the question, ask some sort of rebuttal. Then we come up to my point, my time, and I was saying, hey, was this heroic when y'all was enslaving people and it was fighting for this? Was America great? I used his name. Was America great then? When I started talking about that and putting it in the history books and the Mexican connection, they told me this is not the place for that conversation. That the fellow who was asking this, who was a white fellow, who had compassion for what we was doing, didn't told him we need to hold that conversation and take it outside. He cut me off. The person who was the moderator at that time, who was speaking, cut me off. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear that, and it was on record. You guys can go and pull this up in July and look at it on record. It says the State Board of Education. So I had an African-American gentleman there who says he wanted to help me. He said he was going to call me, Mr. Allen. I haven't heard from him. He said he meant well, but people don't follow up. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So they did not respond. The state hasn't responded. They were not remorseful. They don't want to, give us an acknowledgement. So that's where we are. So we're fighting the State Board of Education and the state of Texas as we're doing now, and bills that we're placing right now to see if we can't remedy that through an apology, an acknowledgement, a resolution, and some type of dollar form that could help us to help us overcome.
We had a question over here, one over here and then back over.
Thank you.
One over here. You got a question up that time?
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Collins. My question is about, I was kind of shocked by by this exception in the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, which I hadn't really thought about until this whole convict slavery discussion. And the exception that slavery would be allowed as a punishment of a crime is kind of an astonishing thing that's in our Constitution. Is there any effort being initiated to amend the 13th Amendment to eliminate that exception?
There was one state that had, what was
Colorado.
Colorado had already stated, that it was wrong. They were the one state, but the U.S. The United States of America needs to do the same thing. And,
That's what I'm talking
is, they're not doing it right now, but that's something we need to advocate for. And we also need to advocate for, to fight against the unequal punishment for equal crimes, because certain individuals get much harsher punishment than others for doing the exact same thing. And some don't even get any punishment. If you have enough money and you have the legal representation, you may do a more horrific crime and not get no time, and someone innocent, like the Central Park Five, serve years because they didn't have the proper representation to prove their innocence. So I know we want to try to get to as many questions as possible, but we need to advocate for getting that taken out.
Thank you both. Dr. Moore, I too am from Houston, Texas, here in the area. I'm actually completing my dissertation at UT Austin on on this topic. I've been working on it for about 7 years. So I'm trying to retell the history of the Texas prison system through the commodity of sugar. Right. So I'm trying to, well, I will say thank you so much for your archive at Rice. I've been there every summer, almost trying to steal from you. Thank you.
Not the first. Not the first.
Yeah.
So as I finish up and prepare to defend in May, I need just a few more missing links, and maybe you can provide those for me. I'm curious about Black landowners in the Sugar Bowl area, right? I'm curious to know if there were any displaced Black sugar farmers in, I guess, let's say around the time the Harlem prison farm was erected. Like, did any Black sugar farmers lose their land to the Texas prison system? Do you know of any?
Yes, it was. And I just found out about in 1836, if you were, after they won their independence, after they were supposed from Mexico, if all the Blacks who were here were free had to get a letter from the state for them able to stay here, okay? And then you move up to 1865, 1866. Well, during Reconstruction, Blacks actually ran the county because they had more. The slave owner may have had 20, 30, 40, 50 slaves, only 5 people in there. So they voted themselves into position. They actually reconstructed that whole Fort Bend area in a 4-county area. That was Fort Bend, Matagorda, Warden, Brazoria. They actually rebuilt it from that. And so what we had after that were the whites, who were the white settlers there, who had came in Austin 300, but you had the European whites who had came over, the Irish, the Germans, a lot of them, they were sympathetic to the Blacks, okay, because they came from oppression. If you go to Richmond, it's a statue there that honors called the Jaybird Woodpecker War. I think it came around in 1880-something, 6 or somewhere up in there. But what happened is, Miss Michelle Alexander has a book called The New Jim Crow. What happened was that they were free, and they got their lands taken from them. If they wanted your land, if they wanted it, they would take it back, or they would, put erroneous taxes on you and so forth. So the Blacks actually lost their legal position in 1886. They also started losing lands and properties that they had accumulated. So that's where you had a lot of Blacks with a lot of properties and a lot of accumulation, and you see it dwindle down to little or nothing. And that continued on all the way up until now in certain areas that gentrified for taxes. But if your kid got put in jail, anything like that, they would put your land up.
Can I make a point here?
Go ahead,
One
Mr.
of the points
Collins.
that I like to make, often we talk about the individuals that were in the shackles and that were in the prison system, but the free individuals were also living under the oppression
Excellent.
of the entire system. So if I had land and I didn't want to sell it to you, and you wanted my acreage, or you wanted my mule, or you wanted my wagon, then all of a sudden I get some trumped up charge, I get arrested or lynched, then my wife and children are left without the wage earner or the husband in the home, either through death, through the lynching, or by getting arrested in convict leasing. So sometimes I say when those contracts, land transfer, were signed, sometimes that stain on that piece of paper may be the blood of someone that had just been beaten and was forced to sign. So it may have been a legal transaction that was coerced to happen. Because Dick Gregory said, we confuse legal with right. So when you trace through the records, you may find records where individuals had to sign for transferring their property, but they may have signed under force. So even the free people were in invisible shackles. So that's important. So I forgot to mention earlier that the Compromise of 1877. So you had that 10 year of expansion of freedmen towns being set up, and then you get the Compromise of 1877, and the northern troops pulled out of the South, and then a much more aggressive oppression in the South in this area, much more intimidation. So by the time you get to, what was it, 1915, with the movie that was shown at the White House? Birth of a Nation. Mm-hmm. So by the time you get to 1915, 50 years after supposed freedom, you get this imagery and all of this things that are being used to criminalize a certain segment of society. And I often like to point out that when you look at the slave schedules, those mulatto children were not the result of the Native Americans or indigenous people having access to the black females. See, a lot of times we paint one group as more aggressive and more violent, but the records show it was a different group. Right? We still have individuals recently, a year or two ago, rape cases at certain universities and individuals getting 3 or 6 months. They didn't want them to go to prison, some of these college students, because prison would be too hard on them. You know, it may mess up their future. Really? Have we not seen this? Do we have some more questions?
And I have a question that Mr. Collins expounds on as well, and he used an analogy, and we use it also. Well, the young man who did the theater shooting up there, Ruth,
the church shooting.
The church shooting. What the church
Dylann
shooting?
Roof.
And Dylann Roof. Well, the church shooting. Look, we had several of them, you know, got by, and after when he did the church shooting, you know, he ended up, the officer ended up taking to get a McDonald's. Now, if that had been a black guy with just, I thought you had a gun, it looked like your finger was a gun, you said something out of line, we're going to shoot first, that's later. Now, what's the difference? You know, when this white kid or some other nationality, well, then when he pulls a gun, they're considered, these are children who just been going in the wrong way. They're just doing children things. But when our kids are doing something, they're looked at in a different light. Okay, they're looked at as they're criminals, you know, and they are guilty until found innocent. So we have a different way of painting that picture, you know.
Yeah, and the other thing, we have a question over here, but I want to come back to that one. Go ahead and get your question.
Mr. Collins, Mr. Moore, thank you so much for being here. My name is Kareem. I'm from Sugar Land, Texas, and I deeply appreciate the incredible work that you've done in our city. It's only as of 2017, 2018 that folks have started talking about this issue. I go past the site every day. I go to that HEB that you mentioned, and I am just so humbled to see y'all here talking about this at Harvard.
Thank you.
I'm actually interested in this question of where this piece of FBISD land is being built, right? So it's for folks who don't know, so this is part of a parcel of land that's 4,500 acres. This particular piece of land is some 1,600 acres of land that we're talking about, which is in the Telfair community. The Houston Chronicle just reported this past week that there's additional parcels of land in the Aliana neighborhood and the Harvest Green neighborhood that are all part of extraterritorial jurisdictions of Fort Bend and of Sugar Land. And what y'all have unearthed is actually part of a larger conversation. This is just the beginning of a very difficult, unreconciled past that we're dealing with in our county and in our city. But my question to you is more specifically about the communities that live in Telfair, Aliana, and Harvest Green are predominantly non-African American. So how are y'all building your outreach and your coalition building strategies to include the newer residents of that area to recognize that the areas in which they live right now are formerly areas where slaves had lived? But in particular, that these communities also share a burden in responding to what's going on. So how are you working with the Homeowners Association? How are you working with parts of the city that don't particularly align with you. Representative Reynolds doesn't represent that part of Sugar Land. So how are you working with folks in that area and making them recognize that while diversity is Sugar Land's strength, is Houston's strength, the diversity of the African American community doesn't perhaps live in these three newer developments?
Well, let me start off. The congressman's name is Pete Olson. Just recently, in December this last year, during the period, he tried to get the Confederate flag put on the license plates, and with the sons and with the Confederate soldiers on it. And this is his area that he represents, right? That's what we're having to deal with. We also had the Sugar Land Heritage Society, which came to one of our task force, and they suggested and put on a Christmas ornament. They advocating this. They got names, Sienna Plantation, Plantation Grove. They still got names after Cunningham and Ellis, and the stadium is named after Mosquito Stadium and all this. So they're promoting this, they're advocating this. They even had a Christmas ornament that came out and advocated for the guys who were named Ellis and I believe that was Ellis and no, it was Ellis and Kempner. No, not Ellis and Eldridge. Ellis and Eldridge, who took over and ran it for Imperial Sugar for a while. And they are trying to act like that didn't happen, but we just want them to come clean. But what is happening with that, these people here, they put out an ornament after they came with us, and this was the Christmas ornament for 2018. And Ellis is the guy who, this camp is named after, who found the Baptist. Eldridge is the guy who ran it after Imperial Sugar bought it, okay? And he was in business with the Kempner family. So that's what we got going on. What we did have over there, we've been talking stories. We had an event some 4 or 5 years ago when we was trying to get the bond in, and one of the TV guys, Mr. Of Fox 26, had ran a segment on it, Isaiah Carrier. We was trying to get part of the bond money to do a building. They was going to build at a park. And we had an event out there, and we was talking about reentry. We was out praying, and we had reenactments and stuff like that. And people from Newland, the Newland territory, they came out there, and they started crying, some of them, knowing that they didn't know about this history. Developers didn't tell about Newland development. They knew about it. They didn't want solar land to Sugar Land. They should have known about it. Fort Bend Historical Society knew about it. So the school district should have had a lot of ways they should have known about it. But when those people came out there, when I went to them individually, like you said, the HOAs, when they was trying to pass this bond, I started telling them the history. The bond didn't pass because they felt bad about it. And Isaiah Carey ran the segment telling them they may be living on the, homes and buildings have possibly on the graves. And we had that event out there, and they was coming out there feeling remorseful. The bond didn't pass. So I think that's one of the things that we're doing to advocate.
One of the things we have to continue to ring the bell, and we have to do the repair work. I often use this analogy, and Mr. Moore told my wife this. Sometime until somebody makes us conscious of a certain situation, many individuals don't know this history because it's not being taught. So one day I was getting dressed, and my wife asked me which T-shirt did I want. I said, well, just hand me one of the wife beaters. And she said, I really don't like that term. I was like, what? The sleeveless T-shirt. So if you Google wife beater, you'll see the definition of what a wife beater is and sleeveless T-shirt. It's a term that's used in locker rooms and with guys that represent, it came from a movie. I forgot, I don't know who was the actor in the movie, but he had a sleeveless T-shirt on, and that became a saying. But until my wife made me see it from a different point of view, I told my boys, well, a wife beater shirt, your shirt won't get caught up. Use one of the sleeve. But I start consciously using sleeveless. I had to change my language once I was brought to the attention that this term should not be used. So we have to continue to ring the bell, to your point, in these communities, and we have to do the repair work. Now, I even go as far sometimes when you hear officers say, I was afraid for my life. Okay, I'm gonna give you that argument. That's one, you want that as your argument. But the reason Mr. Moore needs support to do an interpretive center, museum, to teach this history is because we need to bring those officers in and help them to realize, why are you so afraid that you have to shoot center mass and shoot a child or a human being 19 times You don't even shoot animals 19 times when you hunt. All y'all got your hunting license. You shoot a single shot and kill an animal, but you will shoot these human beings 19 times, unload your clip until it's not. It's something wrong with our mind to do that to another human being. We militarize our local police forces, so we got to do the repair work to bring them in rooms like this because they don't even know and don't believe that they have a problem. When Mr. Moore talked about the PTSD that he has when he worked in the prison system, being in that violent environment affects the officers. They bring that energy home to their families, in their neighborhoods. You may run into an officer at a movie theater. He think you're supposed to do what he say. You know, you don't know who I am. You ain't in uniform, you're just a human being. But we need to do that repair work and help our country to heal. I know you got a question back there.
I just wanted to know if you've done any research to find out if any of the descendants of those prisoners are still around, and if any of them are actually helping you with this.
Well, we're trying to get the state to do DNA testing, and they hadn't done the DNA testing. They've been identified. We're going to have to wrap up. That's the last question. They have not identified by DNA. They have names of prisoners that would have been in the camps, but they have been unable to match names with necessarily with the bones. But we're working to get that done. And you know, one of the things I want to leave y'all with is the other side of the coin. And we're going to flip through this right quick. There's both sides of this coin. Today we talked about one side. And I used that Maya Angelou quote intentionally because history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived. We can't change that past. We can't change what happened in Sugar Land. But if we face with courage the future, we wouldn't have to live it again. So that's an example of an individual that did that. So here we have the penology for profit that went on from 1867 to 1912, and you see these young people. But there's another story where individuals did get paid on a farm or a place at Stringfellow Orchards in Hitchcock, Texas, from Hitchcock to Harvard. So Mr. Stringfellow was a Confederate soldier, but he paid all 30 men that worked at his site $1 a day. The economic impact of that is still being felt today in 2019 by descendants that still own property. So we have a case study for the argument of repair or reparations in which this family, the Bell family, Frank Bell Sr., and his descendants benefited. So after the Civil War was over, Mr. Stringfellow, being a Confederate soldier, could not go back and change his involvement being a Confederate soldier, but he decided, you know what, these men are free, I'm going to pay them. He had the most successful orchard in the area. And instead of having these individuals in stripes, if they had been paid, they could have been like this gentleman.
And you had Oprah Winfrey, and they she did a thing about the 40 acres and a mule. And her great-grandpa, her parents, or descendants, she showed that they got their 40 acres. And they were actually better off than other people because they got their 40 acres. The ones who didn't get their 40 acres, you know, you can see the analogy of where they were not. So the ones who did kind of get their 40 acres, and in Texas, well, you know, after the slave owners lost a lot of land, some of the blacks got it, and it was taken back from them. The area was called Kendleton. Well, it was very popular, and they did well, and then they kind of lost their prestige. But they got a little piece of the land after the slave owner couldn't handle it anymore, and he didn't have slaves. So we are asking for 40 acres. They have 40 acres that are left. With the Fort Bend Independent School District got a 65, they have 25. We're asking for that 40. And for us to have that 40 acres to do a interpretive center and do some other things. So we want to thank you guys for coming by.
Want to end with this quote?
And being part of this. Okay?
This history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Hopefully each of you will lead with the courage to help us continue this work so that we don't have to relive the inhumanity that happened then. And Mr. Moore, I'll give you the last word.
Freedom ain't free. And let's keep it going. Thank you.
So we hope y'all join us for refreshments out. You're glad.